If you want the absolute total control over your ToneX One, then the Pirate MIDI Polar Max is the way to go. Perfect companion for your ToneX One. Now, we've made all the design files and the manufacturing files for this available openly on the GitHub repo, and today we're going to walk through the process of assembling your very own. This is useful if you might want to build your own device from scratch, or if you want to repair or modify your device in some way, you can take a look at the entire build process here. Some extra notes are available on the GitHub repo, including dimensioning for some of the parts such as the heatset inserts. So let's get started. This is what your Polar Max looks like assembled. I've kept the screen overlay on, so all of those marks are just on the protective film that you peel off before use. And this is what it looks like in parts. So to build your Polar Max, you will need the enclosure. This is a two-part enclosure, and there's a number of heatset inserts in this design. It's a more complex assembly than the other Polar devices. There's 4 M3 threaded heatset inserts, 5 in the top part of the enclosure, and then there's 4 of the same dimensioned heatset inserts in this bottom plate of the enclosure. This is where the carrier PCB will be assembled, and these inserts are for assembling the total enclosure and assembly. So you'll need your enclosure. The 3D print files, like I said, are available on GitHub. You'll need 5 M3 7mm screws, 4 M3 5mm screws, 2 foot switches. These are commonly available foot switches used in many popular guitar pedals. They are a momentary foot switch with a JST PH 2-pin connector. The fasteners, of course, the Polar Max carrier PCB, which handles the power input, MIDI input and output, as well as the foot switches and a connector for interfacing with the board. It's important to note that the Waveshare 4.3-inch LCD ESP32 board doesn't have native UART ports, which is the interface used for standard MIDI. It has RS485. If you're not sure what all this means, don't worry, it doesn't matter. All it means is on the carrier board, there's some extra circuitry to convert that RS485 signal into our MIDI input and output signals. You'll need a hex wrench or drive to insert the screws, and also a connector to go between the Polar Max carrier board and the Waveshare screen. As you can see on the back, it's got this terminal block here, and it comes with this terminal block, and then we've got these JST SH 12-pin connectors which break out into this terminal block. Note that not all of the pins are needed. We use this 12-pin connector commonly across all of the Polar Mini and the Polar Plus, so that's there to maintain compatibility, and you will need to check the documentation for which of these ports the wires go into, and that simply inserts here. So first, take your LCD display. There's a couple of small delicate ribbon cables here that connect the PCB here to the display. Be really careful not to bump those or damage them in any way because they are quite fragile. So insert the terminal header block like so, and then we can insert the display into the top part of the enclosure. To do this, peel the adhesive strips off the display, and this is going to stick into the top part of the enclosure. There's a recessed alignment here in the top surface of the enclosure, so simply put the display as far down as you can, and then push it down into place. The recess in the enclosure is slightly larger than the LCD to accommodate manufacturing tolerance as well, so don't worry if there's a small gap on one side of it. Push down carefully around the edges, making care to stay away from the main LCD area, and you don't want to put too much force here as you can damage the display. Now, because of the recessed area of the LCD, we can safely put this face down. Now we need to insert our foot switches. You'll notice in the enclosure, there's a small opening here to allow the cables of the foot switches to pass through. So feed those through. You may need to bend it up slightly. And then insert the foot switch through the hole in the top part of the enclosure, like so. We'll do the same for the other one. And now we'll go ahead and fasten those foot switches, holding them in place with our fingers with the washer and nut. You don't have to use a spring-loaded washer here. A regular washer will suffice. And just make sure that you're not over-torquing those nuts onto the enclosure. There we go. Now this enclosure is out in our limited translucent grey. It doesn't actually matter which color enclosure you use or you receive. The assembly instructions are the same. With that out of the way, let's put that aside. I'm going to take our carrier PCB and the bottom plate of the enclosure and use our 4 5mm M3 screws to fasten into the plate. This is designed to sit flat on the recessed surface of the plate here. And again, be careful not to over torque these. They don't need to be too tight, but you want them to be firm. Okay, now that that's finished, we can go ahead and insert the bottom plate into the enclosure. This can be a little bit fiddly because we need to put the PCB in this way whilst also connecting these foot switches. So the easiest way I've found to do this is to connect the JST cable first. You may find it easier to insert the JST cable before attaching the carrier PCB to the enclosure, or you might not. It's up to you. Align the enclosure so that the port on the side are aligned with the cutouts of the enclosure. Then go ahead and connect your foot switches. With the foot switches now connected, take that JST connector cable and just tuck it out of the way so it's not going to interfere when we put the enclosure top surface on. You don't want it to get mashed against the lip of the enclosure in there. Then simply insert the top plate of the enclosure, sliding it in to make sure that the jacks are inside of the recessed holes. And you can see if it doesn't push all the way down like that, then one of the cables might be caught in the way. So just take it apart and make sure that those cables are tucked neatly away from that. A good tip I find is to make sure that the foot switch JST cables are going over the top of those individual wires on the LCD wiring harness, and that just keeps them tucked away neatly where they can't get damaged. And you'll see that the bottom plate of the enclosure is very slightly recessed by a fraction of a millimeter so that it sits slightly lower than the rest of the enclosure. And this is by design, and you'll know that if something isn't in place correctly or there's a snagged wire because it won't recess fully. Now take the 7mm M3 screws. We're going to use 5 of these, 4 in the corners and then 1 towards the middle of the enclosure. I'd recommend using button head screws here because they sit nice and have a really low profile and will actually sit below the profile of the bottom part of the enclosure. You can of course use whatever fastening type screws that you want, whether they are hex head or a mushroom cap, a button head, but we find that hex head gives the most control over the applied torque as well as preventing any cosmetic damage to the screw. And again, you don't want to over tighten these screws. Tighten them until they're finger tight with a hand tool like this, and you don't want to wrench down on them, otherwise you can damage part of the enclosure. Now we have it. Those screws are in place, our enclosure is assembled, and we have our finished Polar Max. When you're done, you can peel this away for that nice, satisfying, beautiful. So that is how you can assemble, build your own, upgrade or repair your very own Polar Max. If you have any questions about this, please leave it in the comments below. If you found this video useful, leave a thumbs up, like and subscribe to the channel, and let us know what other videos you'd be interested in. That's all for now, guys. Cheers.